US President Donald Trump takes to Twitter justifying the killing of Iran's top general after Democrats question the legality of the move and threatening Iran of further strikes if it retaliates. The death toll from Australia's worst ever bushfires climbs to 24, with 4 more firefighters injured, but an upcoming weather change brings hope of controlling the blazes. And a look back at the French Nobel Prize-winning author Albert Camus, who remains a major literary figure on the 60th anniversary of his death in a car accident. For those of you just joining us, welcome to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Alexander Orcott. Now, President Donald Trump has warned Iran not to seek revenge for the killing of General Qasem Soleimani after he was killed in an American drone strike in the early hours of Friday morning. It comes as tens of thousands of mourners turned out to follow his funeral procession on Saturday, ahead of 2 more days of planned mourning. Several blasts were reported later on near US forces and diplomats in Iraq late on Saturday, though no casualties were then reported. Cami Nedelec has the latest.
Iran should turn the other cheek, the US has warned, after an American airstrike killed a top Iranian general in Iraq. But if Iran does attempt to avenge Qasem Soleimani, US President Donald Trump warned on Twitter that the response would hit very fast and very hard. It's an uptick in tensions that has left many observers worried.
This is and was an enormous escalation, and it follows a string of dubious actions that President Trump has taken that have drastically increased the prospects and the risk of war with Iran and danger to Americans.
Meanwhile, back in Iraq, tens of thousands of mourners accompanied the funeral procession into the night. More ceremonies are to be held for the general in Iran on Sunday and Monday. Once the official mourning period ends, Iran has threatened to strike back. In Tehran, protesters called for retaliation.
We will avenge our general's death. He wasn't just an individual, but a whole country. They didn't kill just one person, they killed a country.
Anticipating the rising threat, thousands of US soldiers were sent to Iraq and Kuwait, as several rockets were fired in Baghdad, one of which seemed to be aiming for the US embassy. Nobody was hurt, and no group has claimed responsibility. One possible target for reprisal is the Strait of Hormuz, the world's #1 waterway for oil shipments. The British Navy has already been instructed to escort British vessels making the crossing.
The White House has now transmitted to Congress its formal notice of the drone strike, Donald Trump simultaneously taking to Twitter to justify the action that several Democrats suggested could be illegal. The US president also wrote that 52 additional Iranian sites are in the US crosshairs should Tehran carry out threats of retaliation. Our Washington correspondent Ketivan Gorjestani has the latest.
The question and the criticism coming especially from the Democrats is whether this decision by Donald Trump to kill Soleimani was a legal one, because there was no authorization from Congress. There was not even a briefing of the top lawmakers in the United States about this order to kill Soleimani. And the Democrats are saying that that might make it illegal. And the argument from the Trump administration is that that is true unless there was an imminent attack, an imminent threat, and that is exactly the position of the Trump administration, is that they thwarted an imminent threat from Soleimani. The difficulty here is that there are no details coming out about what exactly those imminent attacks were. Were there several attacks? Was there just one? And what Soleimani exactly was plotting? And that's also a question regarding international law. But here in the U.S., that is the question that Democrats are asking. Was there an imminent threat? And if so, what was that imminent threat? Briefings have started for several lawmakers here in Washington and will be going on through the next couple of days. But so far, no details coming out about those threats. The other question for the Democrats is, even if this was legal, was it the right decision? It's been years since Soleimani has been on the Americans' radar, and both George W. Bush as well as Barack Obama, decided never to act and never to actually target Soleimani, saying that the benefits of killing Soleimani were no match for the consequences. And that's what we're seeing now, the escalation between the United States and Iran.
The drone strike has polarised opinion around the world as well as within the United States. Donald Trump's supporters have hailed him for taking out a man that they view as a terrorist, though several people have been rallying in many cities against the action, saying they do not want a war with Iran.
All came out, and the reason why we're here is to stand against Donald Trump's, unilateral criminal bombing in Iraq that killed Iranian officials as an obvious escalation with Iran.
I think everyone here knows who is going to bear the burden of any war between the U.S. and Iran, and who has borne the burden of all of the U.S.'s imperialist excursions in the Middle East. It's the regular people, it's poor people, both in the U.S. and Iran and Iraq and the rest of the Middle East.
I think there are some wars that are within reason, and this is out of pocket. This is not any reason to go to war with them.
Moving on to other world news, and months of political uncertainty in Spain could soon be over as the socialist leader Pedro Sánchez received renewed support from Catalan separatist candidates in Parliament. Earlier this week, he reached an agreement with the far-left party Unidas Podemos to form the first coalition government in the nation's recent history, but together they still fall short of a majority and require the separatist MPs to abstain during confidence votes in the coming week. Selena Sykes tells us more.
It's yet another bid to end almost a year of political deadlock in Spain. After two inconclusive elections last year and Catalonia's ongoing push for independence, acting Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is asking Parliament to back his proposed coalition government.
Spain will not be broken. The Constitution will not be broken. What is going to break is the blockade of the progressive government that was elected democratically by the Spanish people. Dialogue must start by us recognizing and listening to one another. There is no other way to resolve this conflict.
After falling short of a majority in November's election, Sanchez's Socialist Party has struck a deal with the far-left party Podemos. If approved by Parliament, the coalition would become the first ever in the post-Franco era.
I believe it's an important moment for Spain, and the best thing that can come from this debate is a progressive coalition government that will do everything possible to improve the lives of Spaniards and resolve the problems of this country.
But the pair are still short of the 176 seats needed for a majority and are depending on support from several smaller parties, including the Republican left of Catalonia, who has confirmed its MPs will abstain in the first round of voting on Sunday, after Sánchez promised to hold talks on Catalonia's future. Three right-wing parties have said they will vote against Sánchez. He looks set to lose the first vote, in which he needs an absolute majority. But the Socialists are confident they'll win in a second vote on Tuesday, where they just need a straight majority.
The death toll in Australia has risen to 24 as the country battles hundreds of deadly bushfires, with 4 more emergency workers injured during Saturday. Though there is hope on the horizon with cooler temperatures and the possibility of light rain in the coming days. Catherine Viet has the story.
Scenes of devastation on Kangaroo Island as a deadly fire broke through containment lines. A famous bush pilot and his son killed as flames overtook their car.
It's fair to say that the rapid damage assessment hasn't been completed, but what we already know is that more than 100,000 hectares have been the subject to very significant fires on Kangaroo Island. This has taken out much of the Flinders Chase National Park.
A third of the island is made up of nature reserves and home to over 60,000 kangaroos and 50,000 koalas, as well as several endangered species. Experts are warning the loss of wildlife to be catastrophic. Elsewhere, the heat and glare of the fires turning the skies red, while residents were warned that the worst may be yet to come.
We are now in a position where we're saying to people it is not safe to move, it is not safe to leave these areas. We do have partial road closures in key roads across the state. And in relation to the projections we had this morning, unfortunately, those projections are coming to fruition.
In an unprecedented move, the Australian Prime Minister has called up 3,000 Defence Force reservists to lend a hand.
The priority of this deployment is to assist ensuring the safety of life, to support the evacuation of affected people, particularly in isolated communities, and provide assistance to isolated communities and support state-managed evacuation centres.
Since the fires started in September, more than 1,500 homes have been destroyed, and about 5 million hectares, or an area roughly double the size of Belgium, has been burned to the ground.
Moving on to West Africa's restive Sahel region, where at least 14 people have been killed by a roadside bomb in Burkina Faso, with 19 others wounded. The victims were students travelling in a convoy of 3 buses, carrying 160 in all. Islamic extremist groups have been responsible for such attacks in recent years, though there's been no claim of responsibility so far. The government issued a statement of condolence on television.
The government strongly condemns this cowardly and barbaric act, which aims to bring down the morale of the population. The government presents its deepest condolences to the victims' families and hopes for a swift recovery for the wounded, and calls on the population to remain active and vigilant together with the defence and security forces. This is a statement by the Minister of Communication and government spokesman.
Hours after a man attacked passers-by in a suburb of Paris on Friday, details soon emerged that he'd been suffering from mental disorders. Nonetheless, French prosecutors are not ruling out terrorism as a motivation for the attacks that killed 1 person and wounded 2 others.
Searching for clues after a stabbing spree in a suburban park near Paris left 1 person dead. Investigators are trying to piece together what motivated the attacker. The man had been treated at a psychiatric hospital, and officials say he'd stopped taking his medicine in June. At the scene, police found religious books in his backpack relating to Islam.
The investigation is ongoing and focusing on the crucial point of his possible radicalization. An act of terrorism cannot be ruled out just because a person has psychiatric issues.
The attacker was shot dead by police after refusing to surrender.
They asked him to get down several times, with his arms outstretched. We heard them asking him to comply, but the guy, he kept moving. He was gesturing in all directions, and so they shot him.
Police were afraid he might have been wearing an explosive belt. A bomb disposal robot was sent in to examine the scene, but no evidence of explosives was found. Officials say the man did not have a criminal record and was not flagged as a radical by domestic intelligence services.
And last up, exactly 60 years after his death in a car accident, the legacy of the French author, philosopher and journalist Albert Camus lives on. 2 years before his untimely demise, in January 1960, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, the second youngest winner in history after Rudyard Kipling. Wasim Cornet takes a look back at his life and work.
Albert Camus' death 60 years ago stunned France. He was just 46 years old when he died in a car crash southeast of Paris. The author of The Stranger, also known as The Outsider in Britain, was also a playwright, a journalist, and a philosopher. More than 20 million copies of his books have been sold, translated into 70 languages. Camus also embraced activism, taking a stand against the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima, the Franco dictatorship in Spain, the horror of Soviet gulags, and the atrocities committed by Nazi Germany. Algeria, where he was born, was often a central part of his writing, but his lack of a clear stance in favor of the country's independence was heavily criticized. His work often spoke of justice, freedom, and revolt, themes that still resonate with today's protest movements. His words, full of hope, are still used in demonstrations around the world, with pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong wearing T-shirts that read, "Freedom is nothing but a chance to be better."
Stay tuned for more updates on France 24.